Hello and welcome back to the second week of the CTL tournament for FAB Chaos. This is your host Saxo, and here we have the second game of the week for FAB Chaos facing facing Separatist Union. On the first game, Nikos Stavoulas lost a very close game to Nicolas Zamouli, who brought Bravo Star of the Show, and it's a matchup with Chain. We've seen before how close it could be, how interesting it could go to, how important it is to find those really important interaction cards during the Chain's really important turn. So right now we have no, it's today we have Michel Beaumont versus Gregory Patellis. Patellis managed to snatch a pretty close game last week that gave us the win for Fab Chaos. Let's see if he manages to break us even, because right now we are losing 0-1. So it's been an interesting week if you are following the competitive Flesh and Blood scene. First of all, because we had the ban announcements, we had the restrictions and the ban announcement from LSS, where pretty much most people expected something like a restriction to Bravo Star of the Show or to Runeblade, but LSS answered that there is no need for a restriction yet, and they announced a bit more constructed events in the upcoming Battle Hardened events in Frankfurt, Spain, and of course in Krakow in the next weeks. So we have an interesting game on our hand. We have a Prism mirror, it seems. Gregory Patellis managed to bring a Prism last week again and played a really close game with a Briar player, a really, really good Briar player. And it seems like he chose to stay loyal to his choice to play Prism. And if my information is correct, his opponent last week had a Katsu or a similar aggressive deck. So it looks like we have a pretty big pivot from the opponent's team. So a quick reminder, the game format is that there are 5 different heroes assigned to 5 different players that each gets randomly paired with an opponent. Each hero can only be used once, and each player may only play 1 game per week. So there is only one Bravo Star of the Show, only one Viserai. So apart from these really strong decks, it's interesting to witness what the teams want to bring on week after week. So it looks like we've seen a pivot from the opposing team, and we've seen that they also like the Prism game. So it looks like we will have a Prism mirror into our hand. Traditionally, a Prism mirror is one of those matchups where it's really important how prepared you are for the game, because there are so many cards that Prism players like to have in their lists and into their decks that want to be used against some other type of heroes like Starvo or any Guardian really, or even the fast games with Runeblades. They want so many cards to do a pretty decent change of play style, and the Prism Mirror as well requires a lot of cards to be committed to be able to give you a great chance of a great match, a great chance to have in the mirror. So a quick reminder that most of Prism's actions and attacks have the phantasm keyword, which practically means if the attack is blocked by an attack action that has a value of 6 attack or more, the attack is immediately destroyed and the chain is closed. The gray spot in that is that Phantasm doesn't work against other illusionist cards, so even though a lot of Prism cards have a great attack value, most of the time 6 or more, they do not stop opposing Phantasm attacks, meaning that it's really up to the amount of 6 power cards that the Prism player affords to run into their 80 card list. Also, it's interesting in this format that you have zero information about what your opponent might be playing, apart from he cannot run the same hero that a previous team member used. So right now the dice have been rolled. We had a 3 from Mr. Michel and an 8 from Gregory Patellis. That means that Patellis will have the opening act. He will choose which player will get the first turn. Prism has been one of those heroes where she's seen a lot of change during Everfest. She saw probably the biggest transformation with not that many cards, because she pivoted from the whole pure light theme with cards like the Tome of Divinity and stuff like this to exactly the build we see from Mr. Michel bringing up to the table. The builds with Arcanite Skullcap, with Findle Spring Tunic, cutting low to these light cards and bringing to the table more good value illusionist cards. So Prism Mirror is supposed to be one of those pretty technical mirror games where there are a lot of interactions because both characters can play at instant speed. There are a lot of timings to be aware of, and it looks like that Gregory Patellis will have the first turn, tick up his Findle Tunic, and probably do one of the best starting turns for a Prism Mirror, setting up with a nod to Wrath. And the interesting thing is that he keeps his action point, so if the Prism player chooses to retaliate with an aura, a spectra of his own, that he will still have his action point to potentially attack with luminaries in order to destroy the spectra. So it's a pretty great opener from Patellis. And right now we'll see how Michel will attempt to retaliate to that. I suppose it will start as a pretty fast-paced game because nobody really wants to give the opponent much time to set up cards, but the lack of the soul vestige in the chest piece, meaning that both players run Tunic, it's not as punishing to allow a Prism attack to go through and deal some damage and get to the soul. So honestly, I think this game will be greatly determined in how much prepared each player is for the mirror. And here we see one of those key cards from the Prism side, the Herald of Erudition, being one of those really dominant cards in the Prism deck. And here we see that's what we're talking about, how important these 6 attack pieces are for the Prism, especially for the Prism Mirror. And here we see a block with the Command and Conquer, a pretty staple card in any deck really, but it's not easy to have as many cards as you want on a deck like Prism, where it requires so many specialist cards to face off certain matches. So it looks like that Michel wanted to refill his arsenal and get his hand up, and looks like we will have a second Spectra from Gregory Patellis. And it looks like he will just swing with one from Mode to Wrath, popping it up to two after no blocks have been declared. A pretty typical turn from a Prism player. And here we see where the new era build Prism shines. Having to board both Merciful Retribution and Ode to Wrath makes that all this cheap damage that Prism wants to sneak in, dealing the +1 life loss, it just adds up to so much potential damage. And here we see an 8 pitch board from Gregory Patellis, and being answered with a Miraging Metamorph, one of those really huge cards from Everfirst for Prism. One of those cards that really changed the way some matches are supposed and really gave speed to a deck like Prism where it really required it. So here, because the Prism player does not have a yellow card in the pitch zone, this card does not have Go Again, and it looks like Gregory Patellis will just allow the 7 to go through, not wanting his opponent to create a copy of any aura, and probably thinking that his opponent Michel right now might be a bit yellow starved, and looks like he will love to keep pushing with his 4-card hand and double Spectra board. So Michel has a card in his arsenal for some time now, but still hasn't managed to use it. We'll see how important this will be going on. It's really interesting the +1 pitch with the new Prism builds having these really expensive Spectra attacks, having this +1 meaning that you could potentially attack with a 3-cost Spectra without having to pitch a blue, with pitching a yellow card to give Go Again with Luminaries. It's just sometimes so important. So it looks like we will see just a single pitch from Tunic and attacking with a Miraging Metamorph. Oh wow! Here we see a pop of the Miraging Metamorph, allowing him to create a copy of Merciful Retribution. And because also Merciful Retribution was in play, that means that because the attack got destroyed, that a single arcane damage will be dealt to the opposing hero. So and here we will see a follow-up. Yeah, he lost his action point by popping the attack. That means that a single pitch has to be played in order to activate the Phantasmal Footsteps. We see another blue card being pitched to gain the action point back, and as an action for the turn, a Haze Bending will be played. So here we see a pretty huge board from the Prism side. Oh, that's not right. Merciful Retribution reads if it's a non-token light card attack, so that's why the card does not deal the arcane damage, so my bad there. So that means that even though the illusionist attack got destroyed, it's not a light card, so Merciful Retribution does not trigger. And it looks like we will see another pressuring attack from Michel's side, attacking with a Warchin Herald, a red Warchin Herald, and again allowing it to hit without having a yellow card in the pitch zone is not threatening too much damage. And also Prism has this copycat card that allows to copy all of the other illusionist attacks in the combat chain, meaning so that the attack has still to be in the combat chain in order to be copied. That means that even though if the attack hit it because it goes right into the soul, it's still not in the combat chain for it to be copied. So right now it looks like we are back on Gregory Patellis' turn. It looks like that Michel has managed to build up a pretty huge life total lead, having a massive 12-point life lead. But again, Prism is one of those really tricky games, really tricky matchups where a huge life lead or a huge life loss might not be as important as other matchups. We've seen that again with so many decks where it doesn't really matter. And here we see, wow, we see a second Ode to Wrath being played. And here we have Gregory Patellis' side having a massive board right now. Michel must really feel the pressure from Gregory Patellis' side, meaning that all of these small aura attacks, all these single point of attack, meaning that are potentially dealing 3 damage or having to sacrifice a whole card from Michel's side. So Michel must really be feeling the pressure that Gregory Patellis has managed to acquire over these last few turns. And that's where how we've seen the Prism matchup to shine versus decks like Bravo Star of the Show, that having this huge board is something that is really the way that the Prism wants to play. So he wants to have the time, but here we had a really quick and rapid board development from the Prism of Gregory Patel's side. And here we see a pitching of the fractal replication. That's probably one of these cards that has been stuck in Michel's hand for so much time, because Gregory Patelis never allowed an attack from the Prism side of the Michel's Prism side to stay on the combat chain, to allow it to be copied from fractal replication. And that's, even though fractal is one of those really strong cards, it's tricky to remember that it's not able to copy a card if it's not currently on the combat chain. So right now we witness an attempt to block from Gregory Patelis, but it looks like he's able to sacrifice another block piece to maintain some of his life total, because right now the longer the game goes, it's much easier for Gregory Patelis to keep pressuring, to keep the pressure up for while maintaining this huge board. And here we see a pitch yellow in order to attack with a Herald of Ravages, one of those pretty much blue filler light illusionist phantasm attacks from the Prism side, but it's threatening just so much damage because it has the double Ode to Wrath on board. And here we see an instant Command and Conquer block from Michel's side, meaning that because the attack got popped, Merciful Retribution will deal 1 arcane damage each. So that means 2 arcane damage ramping up to 3 damage each from the Ode to Wrath. So here we see another yellow pitch in order to maintain the action point and keep attacking with these huge Spectras. So here we see a swing with Ode to Wrath having go again, and there is no way for the Prism player to stop that. And here we see again these massive attacks from all the Spectras from Gregory Patel's side, threatening just all of these huge amounts of damage for pretty much nothing, because having this massive board means that all of these spectras are threatening just so much damage. So here it looks like we've seen the first three specters that have been blocked already, and here we are currently on the fourth. And it looks like Michel again will take the hit and the haze bending, getting down to 18, and that's the point where it really shows the difference in the board right now, because even though Michel managed to build this huge life lead, he allowed Gregory Patellis to build this huge board. And here we see a parable of humility, and attack action cards controlled by an opponent hero have -1 while attacking and defending, making it so that any attack action that Gregory Patellis will attempt to use will have -1 attack. And looks like the Parable of Humanity will attack the Ode to Wrath, and that will instantly go into the soul because of the double Merciful Retribution and dealing the massive 6 point of damage due to Ode to Wrath. Also, Arcane Barrier is something to keep in mind here, that it's sometimes really important to have in this matchup, but most of the time it's not easy to sacrifice a whole equipment slot just to have an arcane barrier, because most of the time you never want to be in a situation like this. But Michel really right now is trying to pull off the impossible, to come back from this huge life lead. Right now, Michel really wants to have a breathing air and attempt to probably do a huge turn and threaten Gregory Patellis' life in order to acquire the life lead he wants to, in order to be able to come back to this game, because right now he has health loss, he has the board loss, and it's really hard for him to come back. And it looks like Gregory Patelis will just ignore the Parable of Humility and just swing and go for the kill, go for the face to attempt to end the game as quickly as possible. And having this massive board makes it just so much easier. And here we see all these small attacks threatening this massive 2 points of damage, making it so that it's almost impossible for Michel to come back from this position. And here we see that it's just how strong the Prism deck can be if it is allowed to have this huge board time and have these huge opportunities to build up his board, because right now there is literally almost zero chance for Michel to be able to come back from this game. And it's the reason that we've seen in some other matches too how important it is to keep the prism pressured. So Michel here chose to attempt to rush out the game and try to kill Gregory Patelis as fast as possible, but he just didn't have the time. And it looks like we'll see just a 4 pitch and play Ode to Wrath and attack the opposing Ode to Wrath in order to just destroy it and do not have this constant pressure applied to him every turn. But here it's where the life total is really huge. And right now we see another trigger from Haze Bending, one of those really strong Everfest cards that got drafted into the Prism deck, making it so so much more consistent to play this whole aura game. And here we see a yellow pitch for a red Warden Herald, and here pretty much we are at that point where every attack is pretty close to lethal. And here we see pretty much a no block from Michel. And here we see Michel getting attacked and allowing him to end the game. So we had a pretty quick, a really quick Prism mirror on our hands. We see a tie right now. That's pretty great news for us that we managed to go up 1-1, coming to the second week of CTL. So Prism mirror, it's a tricky way to play. It's never a great idea to allow Prism to develop a huge board. And here we saw, even though Michel tried to race the game, he probably got blocked a bit too much, having his fractal and copy cards in his hand. So what we've seen right here, and probably what happened during this game, even though we didn't have information about Michel's hand, is that he probably got stuck and attempted way too much to combo out with his fractal replications. And let me bring up the card really fast. So the thing is that even though it's one of those really strong cards that can give you these pretty amazing turns, it's still so punishable to have it in your hand when, okay, here it is. So fractal replication, it's one of those cards that it's really strong. There have been so many stories with Prism player using fractal replication to do these huge turns with huge amounts of damage and stuff like that. But also the reason why this card is so strong is because it has just so many flaws and so many drawbacks. So pretty much what we've witnessed during the first and second turn of Michel's play is that he probably got stuck with one or two copies of fractal replication and was never really allowed to combo out and do the huge turn he wanted to do in order to come back to this game. So that's probably why this game has been so one-sided, and if you are stuck 1 to 2 turns and you are not able to attack and you are not able to pressure the life total and your opponent is allowed to, you know, trigger, play his Merciful Retribution into Ode to Wrath, into second Ode to Wrath, into Haze Bending, at some point, I guess if you are about 8 pitch value behind, it starts to get really grim, and Michel never really had the time to come back from it. And Prism really is one of those decks where it feels like that even in any matchup really with Constructed. We have so many stories with how quickly a Prism deck can run away with the win, and of course that's something that applies to the mirror as well. So pretty quick game. We are up again to 1-1, meaning that there are 3 more games that will have to determine the victor for week 2. So that's at least good that we don't have to go to bed really late. So thanks again for stopping by. If you like the content, leave a follow, a like, and subscribe. This is your host Saxo, and we will have the stream scheduled for tomorrow evening, and No, it will be Friday evening, and Saturday evening we will have the rest of our matches. So keep nearby, and if you want to see some more flesh and blood content before the big tournaments start to show up, this is your chance. So thanks again for stopping by, and see you around.